My name is Laura Catherine Shipp Lewis, and this is my life story. It occurred to me with the recent passing of my father, Ralph Earl Shipp, and my mom, Patsy D. Shipp, has been gone for 11 years, and my older sister, Deanne Shipp, has been dead for a few years, that there's no one who really remembers my early childhood and elementary years, and then on up into my adulthood. So I thought I'd take this opportunity with the help of my brother, Ralph Craig Shipp, and record my life story. And then I'll be adding some pictures to it so that it'll be more interesting than just looking at me. I was born on December 9th, 1952 in Bethesda, Maryland, in Suburban Hospital. And that's kind of significant because I actually had my first child at Suburban Hospital. And then when I went back to school in my 30s to become a registered nurse, I worked at Suburban Hospital as both a tech and then as a new registered nurse. My father was Ralph Earl Shipp, and he was born in 1927. And he led a very interesting life, and we have recorded his life story, and it's available on YouTube. My mother was Patsy D. Hopgood Shipp, and she was born in 1929. And growing up, I always looked like her. And that's a good thing, and I have a lot of her traits and all. But the interesting thing is when I started having children, none of them looked like me. And that was kind of perplexing to me since I had always looked like my mom. But you'll see lots of pictures and you can judge for yourself as to whether or not I look like my mother. I had 3 siblings. My oldest sister, Deanne Shipp, and she later married Irvin Buck, was born 4 years and 1 day before me. So I never really had my own birthday celebration because her birthday was December 8th and mine was December 9th, but that was okay with me. Then I have a younger sister, Robin Elaine Shipp Ritchie, and she is 3.5 years younger than me. So I have lots of memories of us growing up together, sometimes fighting with each other, and we're great friends now. And then my only brother, Ralph Craig Shipp, was born in 1958, so he's about, maybe it's 5.5 years. But I have a picture that I'll share with you of when Dad was babysitting us. And I believe it's when Craig was born, but we always got a laugh out of that, pictures and the way that we're dressed up. I had wonderful grandparents, my Shipp grandparents. I remember them living on Q Street in downtown DC. And the only real memory I have of my grandfather Shipp was him sleeping in the hammock or him putting birdseed in Grandma Shipp's flour because he said that made it healthy. I remember it as being birdseed. I'm not sure if it really was birdseed. It might have been sunflower seeds, but that always got her a bit annoyed, but she just sifted out when she went to make something. But I remember lots of gatherings at their house with all of my cousins, and I had several cousins that were around my same age. My cousin Carol Bowen was born in the same year as I was, and we always got the same Christmas presents from Grandma and Grandpa Shipp. And so we had to open them at the exact same time because otherwise we'd know what we were getting. And then she had 3 siblings, and they were close to Robin's age and around the same age. And then I had an older cousin, Gene Shipp, and I thought he was just the coolest thing ever. And he was Deanne's age, and I remember him kind of helping me learn how to dance rock and roll and just different things. And I thought it was really neat to have an older cousin like that. My grandparents on the other side, the Hopgoods, my mother's parents, Granddaddy Hopgood was 15 years older than Grandmother Hopgood because he had been a career Army officer. And he felt that if you were an Army officer, you should not marry. Well, when he was about 38 or 39 years old, he was out hunting with a group from the Army, and a shotgun accidentally discharged and hit him in his arm. And it resulted in the amputation of that arm, so he could no longer be in the Army. So he went and found my grandmother, Olive Odillion King, who was a school teacher in, I believe, Tennessee, and they ended up getting married. And I remember going to their house in Bethesda, and they had what seemed like acres and acres of land. I think it was about 1 acre, actually. But we would go there and we would spend lots of time there. And I remember one Easter, Deanne and I got a little duck in our Easter basket. And we raised it until it was too big to be at our house. And then we took it to Granddaddy Hopgood's house. And it was there until it got pretty big. And then he told us that some neighborhood dogs had gotten it, but we suspect that we really ate it on a Sunday dinner and didn't realize it. But my mother had 4 siblings, and 2 of them were close to her age. My Uncle Ted, we called him, and my Uncle Skipper, we called him. And then she had 2 younger siblings, and Aunt Sandy was 8 years old when I was born, and Uncle Danny was 18 months older than her. So they were both like in elementary school as I was growing up. So it was always a neat place to go because I had this aunt and uncle that weren't that much older than me, and we had lots of great adventures together and things. My great-grandparents, the only ones I remember are my great-grandparents King. So that would be Hewlin King and Desi Green Bolin King. And they had a little rambler, and it had a basement. And I remember going over to their house, and in the basement they had a second refrigerator, and it had knee-high soda, grape and orange. And that was the only time we ever got soda. And it was so exciting to go down to their basement and try and determine which of the 2 that you wanted to get. My granddad King also built little furniture for my dolls, little chairs and tables and things. And in his earlier years, he had owned a bakery. And I actually have the cake plate that was used in one of the display places at his bakery. But I just remember going to their house and having a grand time and feeling so grown up getting to drink that soda. When I was born, my parents lived on Montauk Avenue, which was in Bethesda, which was considered way out of the town, way out in the sticks, although now it's like built up and crazy. But that's where we lived, and they had a rambler. And my sister and I shared a room in the basement. And my dad had finished it off with knotty pine paneling and things. And there was a recreation room down there, and then our bedroom. And that's where we had Christmas and all kinds of fun and great things. When Robin came along, I, of course, became a big sister. And then when Craig came along, I had 2 of them to take care of and treat like my little baby dolls and things. I also had a Ricky Jr. doll because I Love Lucy was very popular at that time. So a doll came out that was called Ricky Jr. and we would carry it around everywhere with us. And he was about the size of probably a 3-month-old baby. Next door, I had a friend named Rosemary, and we would go out and do all kinds of things. And then on the other side lived the Schultzes, and they had a son, Andy Schultz, and everybody thought he was my boyfriend. But I remember playing store with them and different things, and we lived on a cul-de-sac, so we would go out and play in the yards and things, spent a lot of time outside in our little blow-up pool, and we had a sandbox and all kinds of fun things to do. When it came time for me to go to kindergarten, they were renovating or doing something at the elementary school. And so I actually went to kindergarten. My teacher was Mrs. Davis in the basement of a church. And I was kind of a shy girl. I was very much an introvert, but I did well in kindergarten and got promoted to first grade where my teacher, oh, that's where I had Mrs. Jones, I think. Well, I'll have to look on the pictures and see. About that time, after first grade, we moved to Rockville, to 3903 Littleton Street. And that was a split-level house, and I shared a bedroom with Robin, and Craig was in his own bedroom, and Deanne had her own bedroom. But that switched back and forth many times during the years as to who was sharing the bedrooms. I had a very best friend named Marty Drake, and we were best friends until she moved away, I think when we were in 5th grade. So from 2nd to 5th grade, we were inseparable. We walked home from school together, even though we didn't really live that close together. We spent the night at each other's house. We just did everything together. She had 2 brothers, Tony and Bill, and Tony was older than her, and so was Bill, but I thought Tony was just the cutest thing and had the biggest crush on him for the longest time. I remember in 1963 when President Kennedy was shot, we were doing a Thanksgiving program rehearsal at school, and they let us go home early. And we walked home to Marty's house, and I still remember her mom sitting at the kitchen table with her cup of coffee and her cigarette with tears streaming down her face because Kennedy had been shot. That weekend, we were supposed to go on a Girl Scout or Brownie, I guess it was Girl Scout camp out. And Mom was our troop leader, and she did not want to cancel, so we went ahead and we went on that overnight trip, but we were back home in time. I still remember watching on TV all of the funeral goings on for President Kennedy. Brownies and Girl Scouts. I started in the Brownies probably when I was about 8 years old, and I enjoyed it. And I remember we went down and we were on Bozo the Clown, was filmed down in D.C., and I believe we were on it a couple of times. And we'd sit on the little stools they had around the set, and they'd come around and, we were kind of the audience, but they'd talk to us and we'd actually be on camera. And that was a fun experience. Then I went on into the Girl Scouts when I got old enough, and Mom was our leader. And she recruited Bonnie O'Donnell, a neighbor down the street who didn't have anyone old enough to be a Girl Scout, and she was the co-leader. And we did many projects. We did a lot of camping. We did a lot of crafts. I earned a lot of badges. And by the time I was in high school, I was in a different troop, a senior troop, but I did become a first-class Girl Scout, which was the equivalent nowadays of a Eagle Scout. So I have lots of great memories of plays and all kinds of different things that we did. We went on one camp out, and somehow we must have burned some poison ivy. And I ended up with poison ivy all over my face, all over my hands, and it was awful. People would see me and they wouldn't even recognize who I was because my face was so swollen. But that had me remember to be very careful about poison ivy. And to this day, I'm extremely careful. And if I do end up getting some, I usually have to get a steroid shot to get it under control. In 1961, my grandfather Shipp died, and he was buried at Arlington Cemetery, and I went to the funeral, and I remember the taps and the guns firing and all the pomp and circumstance that went along with a military funeral. And then in 1965, Granddad Hopgood died, and he was buried just, I believe, down the hill from where Granddaddy Shipp was. And I've been back several times, and I actually took my youngest 3 children back there, and we were able to find both of their graves, and by then both of my grandmothers had joined them, as well as my Uncle D, my mother's uncle, that she was named after, is buried up the hill from them. He actually died in Vietnam, and his name is on the wall, although he died of a heart attack over there, and he wasn't killed in combat, but he was still considered a combat death. In 1960, I had the opportunity to be a flower girl at my Uncle Skip and Aunt Gail's wedding. And that was great fun. I got to dress up in a frilly dress, and until about 5 years ago, I still had the basket that I carried as a flower girl. And then my children convinced me that it needed to go somewhere else. I had many great teachers throughout my elementary school years. I don't remember a lot of their names, but I do remember, I think it was Mrs. Resnick, was either second or third grade. But in fifth grade, I had Miss Guy. And she was young. Most of my other teachers had been old and married. She was young and single, and we just thought she was the greatest teacher ever. And she ended up getting married the summer after I had her, and she invited about 4 of us from her class to her wedding. And I still remember Mom taking us to her wedding, and we thought we were so grown up to be invited to our teacher's wedding. Well, the next year I had the opposite. I had Mr. Finley. First time I'd had a male teacher. It was 6th grade. He expected a whole lot more of us, I believe, than we were used to giving. But I remember my thoughts of him were that he was mean and he was very strict, but I think he was just trying to get us to live up to our potential. For 7th through 9th grade, I went to Belt Junior High School. And in 7th grade, I actually failed French. And I tried to change the grade on my report card because I didn't want Mom and Dad to know that I'd failed French. Well, my teacher was French. She didn't speak any English. And years later, I realized that the biggest problem I had when I took Spanish was that I didn't understand what conjugating a verb was. And I didn't understand that it had to change according to who was speaking and things. So once I got that concept, I did very well in Spanish, and I took it for 5 years, and I could speak enough to do an assessment of a patient or ask if they had pain or whatever. But that's probably my most vivid memory of Belt Junior High School. I was in the band there, played in the band. I started off on saxophone, but they thought that it was making my teeth pull out more, so I ended up changing to the percussion instruments. I got a letter there, I believe, in track and field. Might have been basketball. I'll have to go back and look at my yearbook and see. But after my 9th grade year, I had a friend, Josie, who had moved further out in Rockville, and I was spending the night at her house, and across the street was a development of houses. So we decided we would go over and look at these model houses. So we went over and looked at some model houses, and I remember one of them cost $40,000. And this was in probably 1967, maybe. 66, and we decided that must be where millionaires live because we didn't know anybody who could pay $40,000 for a house. We had no concept of mortgages or anything like that. We thought you had to just pay cash for the house. So anyway, I went home and I told Mom and Dad about these beautiful houses that we'd seen. We were living in Wheaton on Littleton Street at the time, and they went out and looked at them and decided they were going to buy a house. So they bought one of the houses. They had it built, 14913 Waterway Drive. And remember, my last name was Shipp. So I can remember years later trying to call and order things on the phone because the internet didn't exist. And they would ask me the address I needed it sent to. And I would tell them, and they would say, very funny, and hang up. Because why would a ship live on Waterway Drive? But that was a great house, and I lived there. Actually, my parents were still there when I got married. I lived there all through college. And I had a room on the first floor, and then later on I shared the room in the basement with Deanne. But I have many fond memories of that house, and we had beautiful flowers. And I had a good friend down the street, April Friedman, lived about 4 doors down. She was in my wedding. We went to high school together and things. The worst thing that happened while I was living there is I was driving to school. I went to Peary High School, Robert E. Peary High School, and I was driving to school my senior year, and I had other people in the car with me, and I was going straight across the road. We lived off of a very busy road, and I was going straight, and a woman was turning, and I went straight, and she turned into the front of me. And she tried to say that it was my fault, and her husband was a judge, and we had to get a lawyer and sue him. But in the end, she had to pay for the damages to our car. But that's the only car accident that I've ever had, and it wasn't my fault. During high school, I had a couple of boyfriends, but one main boyfriend, and his name was Alan Baker. And we were Methodist, and I'd met him at a Methodist youth retreat that we'd had with various churches there. He didn't go to the same church I went to. So he went to Walter Johnson High School, and we dated for about 2.5 years, and he was going to be a dentist. And he went to Western Maryland College. He was a year older than me. And once he went away to college, I just decided that we weren't on the same track, and I broke up with him. And so when I graduated from high school in 1970, we did go to my senior prom together. But shortly after that, I broke up with him. But he loved photography, and he took all kinds of pictures of me. And in high school, I was in a play called JB, and I was a dancer in that play. And then we went to several homecomings and proms and Christmas dances. And of course, proms, we go to his at Walter Johnson, then we go to mine at Perry. And my mom made almost all of my prom dresses and things. And when I was in elementary school, junior high, and even high school to some degree, we had to wear dresses to school all the time. And I wore a lot of jumpers with shirts underneath. And Mom made almost all of my jumpers and things. I very rarely had anything that was bought at a store. But I graduated from Robert E. Peary High School in 1970, and I applied to the University of Maryland, and I got in, and I had to decide what my major was going to be. So I looked at all different things, and I was trying to plan out my schedule, kind of like you do in high school, where, you have math and science and history and English and physical education, and they were like, oh, you don't take physical education in high school. I'm like, what? I couldn't live without physical education. Miss Baden had been my PE teacher throughout high school. I'd taken it all years. I was in the advanced PE class and things, and I just loved PE. So I decided I would major in physical education. And the thing about physical education was you had to start as a major right away because you needed 136 credits. And so you had to take more than 18 credits or else go one summer. And a lot of the classes built on other classes. So if you didn't have the beginning classes, you'd have to wait to take the more advanced classes. And there was a lot of science, anatomy and physiology, kinesiology and things. But I did well and enjoyed it. Some semesters I'd have as many as 40 hours of activity classes between dance and hockey and basketball and gymnastics and because over the 4 years, we took it all. One summer, I went to summer school at the community college to get a few of the credits out of the way so that I could graduate in the 4 years. I did graduate in the 4 years, and that was 1974. However, in 1972, through a mutual friend, I had met or re-met John Lewis. And we had actually known each other when I was in high school. He and his first wife, Pam, had been my counselors in the Methodist Youth Fellowship group. And I knew Pam a little bit better than I knew John. They were 7 years older than me. John was 7 years older than me. So he and Pam had been married for about 4 or 5 years, and she had announced one day that she wasn't very happy and that she was leaving him. So it wasn't too many months after that I was reintroduced to him by a mutual friend. And we set up to go to Georgetown on our first date with this other couple. At the last minute, they backed out, and it was just John and I. And we went down to Georgetown and went to a few places, heard some live music and things, and got along fairly well. Well, then we dated some more. And then, of course, in true fashion, his wife Pam found out we were dating and decided that she wanted him back. So she tried to get him back, and that didn't really work. And in February of 1973, we became engaged. And Mom and I went out looking at wedding dresses, and we came home, and my dad had been sick all day and had been taking Pepto-Bismol. Well, it turned out that he had a ruptured appendix, so I can always remember when he had his appendix removed, because that's when it was. But that October, John and I got married in the Methodist church there that I had gone to as a child and started our life together. Well, a few months before that, we had bought a converted barn in Mount Airy, Maryland, which when I was in high school, my dad wanted to move to Mount Airy, and we told him that was the other side of the world. There was no way we were moving to Mount Airy. So fast forward about 3 years, and here I am buying. We had 5 acres and a converted dairy barn, and we lived there for about 3 or 4 years. And I have great memories of living there. That's where Carrie, our first daughter, was born in 1975, and we brought her home to there. We had a garden that we worked in. We had chickens. We had huskies, and our huskies had puppies. We bred them, and they had puppies, and we sold those puppies. And in 1976, a friend of mine who lived in the house in front of us and me, we decided to open a craft store, and it was called Park Avenue Crafts and Creations, and it was located on Park Avenue in Mount Airy. We had it for about 2 or 3 years. We sold craft supplies as well as finished craft products that other people had made that they brought in to sell. And we taught a lot of classes and things. It was a very small store. I had a place in the back where I could, big playpen where I could put Carrie, and she would take her naps back there. But we had a grand time running that store. I don't think we made any money, but we had a great time. Well, in 1976, John had been working for IBM when we got married, and he got his 10 years in, and he decided he'd had enough. So he decided to leave and start building modular homes. So we started doing that. I still had the craft store. And the fall before that, he had decided that he would create what was called Santa Claus Lane. And he had seen it when he lived in New York. And it was like an outdoor festival at Christmas time. And it would have Santa's workshop and all different buildings, chapels and just all kinds of different things. And it would have a place where kids could see Santa. And he was part of the Lions Club, so the Lions Club took this on as a project. And they made this outdoor wonderland. And I still have some of the lanterns that he built as streetlights for that. So he did that about 3 or 4 or 5 years, and it would consume our December. It was open for a week, and they would ask for donations of canned food for the local food pantries, and they would give out hot chocolate, and it was a big hit, and everybody around there all knew about Santa Claus Lane and that John had started that. So after Carrie was born, we lived in the barn for about another year and a half, and we ran into someone who was building custom homes. And we found a 5-acre lot, and we decided that we would have a home built. So we did, and it was in Damascus, about 5 miles from where we'd lived in Mount Airy. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home. So we built that, and that's where we were living when Kenton was born in 1977. We were in construction at the time, and John's handle was Muddy Boots, because we had CBs. He was Muddy Boots, and I was Crafty Critter. And that's how I would communicate with him when he was out on job sites. But I went with him many, many a time, and we would have either Carrie in the playpen or Carrie and Kenton in the playpen. They went on lots of job sites with us. We did a lot of the work ourselves. It was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of hard work. Well, in 1978, I happened to be at home. It was in the summertime. We did not have central air at that time in our house. And I was wearing some short shorts and a halter top, and there came a knock on the door. And I answered the door, and there stood 2 missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And at the time, we had been building a home for someone who was a member of the church. but they hadn't told anybody about us. But I talked to them a little bit about a program the church had called Family Home Evening, where one evening a week the family would all get together and they would sit down and they would have a lesson and just generally have a spiritual evening. So these elders at my door, one was Elder Strong, and I don't remember the other one's name. They said that they were from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and would I be interested in them coming and doing a family home evening for us? This was on a Friday. So while I was talking to them, John arrived home, his boots caked in mud and concrete because he'd been pouring a concrete basement. We did that also. And he said, sure, why don't you come back on Monday night? So on Monday night, they came back, and I still remember them teaching us the song, Do As I'm Doing. And Kenton was about 6 or 8 months old, and Carrie was 2.5 years older than him. And they just loved it. And then they told the story of the little red hen with paper bags. Well, the little red hen had always been one of my very favorite stories. So we asked them lots of questions, and basically, did we have to give up iced tea if we joined their church? And they said yes, but it wouldn't really matter because at that time we didn't have a lot of money and we lived on iced tea. So we progressed along, and that fall, September 23rd, 1978, we were baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And a particular elder arrived the day before we were getting baptized, and his name was Elder Mordew. And he was a big guy from California, and his father owned a construction company. So during the next 6 months that he was there, he and John talked construction. The elders would come out to various projects we were working on. We were building a spec house at that time in Damascus, and I remember them sitting there and talking about the concrete footers and things. But we had a lot of special friends in the church. Joy and Art Cummings. Joy is where Amy Joy gets her middle name from. The Lowe's, I'm going to forget somebody, but just all the Tennys, the whole Stevenson family. They were just all kinds of people that just took us under their wings and brought us along in the church. The Gladdings, just tons of people, many whom we still keep in contact with to this day. So not too long after that, I found out I was pregnant with Amy. So all was going great until she was born in October. It was the first part of September. We went to a regional church conference they were having, and a lot of the apostles and various people from the church were there, and we went to a Saturday night meeting that was for adults. And I had ridden in a van with some other couples from the church. I believe Diane Ferguson it was her van. So we're sitting there and we're listening to this person speak and all, and I'm thinking, boy, it almost feels like I'm having contractions, but I kind of dismissed it, and we rode home in the van, and then the next day we got up and we went into the general for the whole family conference at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I remember sitting up in the bleachers. It was at like a convention center kind of place. I remember sitting there, and there was a clock on the wall behind the speaker. And I'm looking, and I'm starting to notice that like every 3 minutes I'm having a contraction. Not that I was bored with what the speaker was saying, but the clock was right behind him. So pretty soon it's down to every 2 minutes. So I'm like, this probably isn't good. So I'm trying to drink water and things. So we got home from there, and I called up a friend of mine, or she called me, and I said, I think I'm having contractions. And she told me that if I did not hang up and call the doctor right away, she would call the doctor. And her name was Katie, but her middle name was Amy. And that's where Amy gets her name, Amy Joy, from. Because if I hadn't called that doctor and gotten to the hospital, we would have probably lost Amy, because I was about 26 weeks pregnant, I think. And so they put me on all kinds of meds, stopped my labor, put me on bed rest. And finally, they did sonograms, but back in those days, they weren't real accurate, but they decided I was a month more pregnant than I thought I was. I thought I was due November 28th, and they convinced me that I was really due October 28th. So in the middle of October, they took me off all of the drugs because it was safe for me to have her. So she was born on October 17th, 1979, and we were watching the World Series, and Robin was working as a security guard, and she came back by in her uniform and all and handcuffed me to the chair saying I couldn't have this baby because I'd started having contractions. And then I tried to go to bed, and before I knew it, boom, I was in full-blown labor, and she was born about a half hour after I got to the hospital. So she weighed right at 5 pounds when she was born, and it quickly became apparent that she was about 6 weeks early, or 8 weeks early, as she had some breathing difficulties. So they took her down to Children's Hospital in D.C. and put her on oxygen. They never had to intubate her. And she was there for a week, and then I received a call saying she was ready to come home to come and get her. So we went down, my mom and I went down and picked her up, and her hospital bill was about $18,000, which at that time was a lot of money. And we paid on that for probably about 2 years, and then they offered that if we paid it off, they would cut half of it off. And John had just gotten a bonus at work for $6,000, so that's what we did. But Amy was by far our most expensive baby. We were self-employed, our health insurance wasn't that great, but she was worth it. So that was 1979. So when we brought Amy home from the hospital, she weighed 4 pounds, 13 ounces. And I don't think she slept more than 2 hours until she was over 6 months old. So she just kind of slept in bed with us and everything else. So at that point, we decided that we needed a bigger bed. So we bought a king-size waterbed. And we loved that waterbed, and I had it actually until 2016. Not the same mattress. We had to get different mattresses, but the same one. And I remember one night when she was in bed with us, because she nursed so often that I would just have her in bed with us. And she somehow got a hold of John's nipple and started nursing on his nipple. And oh my goodness, he screamed and about went through the roof. So I kind of got a chuckle out of that. He knew what it was like. So we had joined the church in 1978, and after we had been members for a year, we were eligible to go to the temple and be sealed as a family for time and all eternity, so that when you die, that's not the end of your marriage. So on December 28th, 1979, with Amy as a small baby and the other 2 children with us, we went to the Washington, D.C. temple, and we were sealed for time and all eternity as a family. So around 1981, I started having a lot of health problems, and they weren't quite sure what was wrong, but I was having a real hard time digesting my food and things and having a lot of pain. And they thought it was my gallbladder, but it wasn't that. Well, long story short, I spent about a year in and out of Johns Hopkins University Hospital. And every time they'd come in, they'd say, oh, we're going to figure out what's wrong with you. And then after they ran their little bit of tests, they'd decide that, well, no, they couldn't really figure it out. So when Amy was born, after she had been born, they had done my titers for rubella. And they'd done the same thing with Carrie and Kenton. And they kept telling me that I didn't have a high enough titer for rubella and encouraged me each time to get the rubella vaccine again, which I did. So I'd actually thought I'd had rubella as a child, but when I went away to college, I got the vaccine, and then I got it after Carrie, and I got it after Kenton, and I got it after Amy. And it was after I got it when Amy was a year old that I started having a lot of my issues. I had a lot of dizziness. I would have weakness in my right hand. I lost my gag reflex. And to this day, I do not have a gag reflex. And they ran some tests at Johns Hopkins, and they thought maybe I had MS. But then they decided that no, it wasn't MS. So they weren't quite sure what was going on. They knew something was going on neurologic, but they didn't know what it was. And then they decided maybe it was a GI tract issue, because that was happening at the same time. Then I decided that it had a lot to do with what I ate. So I had been making whole wheat bread because that was supposed to be really healthy for you. I ground my own wheat and things, so we decided that was part of the problem. So I eliminated that from my diet and did a few other things and started to feel a little better. And then I started getting nauseous again. Well, then I found out I was pregnant with Amber. That's why I was getting nauseous. So Amber was born in February of '83, and child number 4, and she was a delight to us. And for a while, my health issues weren't really a problem. So when she was 6 months old, we had the opportunity to take a trip across country. John, by this point, we were no longer self-employed in building, and he was working for a company that sold medical supplies, and they were having a convention in Salt Lake City. So we packed up the family in our van, and we had a pop-up camper that we had bought, no air conditioning in either one of them. But hey, it doesn't get hot in Salt Lake City in the summer, is what everyone told us. So we trooped out to Salt Lake City, and we stopped and visited all kinds of places along the way. We spent a week in Salt Lake. John was in meetings most of the time, but I took the kids to the Salt Lake Zoo, and they rode an elephant, and we went to Temple Square. We just did all kinds of fun things for a week, but it was hot. They said unseasonably so. Then we went on out west, and we saw my college roommate, Kay, and Modesto, and we went down into LA. We went through, we'd stopped in Yellowstone on the way out. We went through the Grand Canyon on the way back, but we were gone for a month, and we just had a grand time, even though, Carrie, I think, was almost 8, but the rest were all under 8. But it was a great trip, and we had many great memories of going there. Well, when I had been in the hospital, I had a gastroenterologist named Dr. Burns. And he had done a colonoscopy and things and felt that part of my intestine was very thin, almost like something was making it expand like a balloon so that it got very thin. And it was exactly where I was having my pain, in the lower right quadrant. So he finally determined that they should do exploratory surgery. So I had exploratory surgery, and they found out that I had had what they called chronic appendicitis, as well as the one side of my intestine wasn't really attached. And so what was happening was when I ate things that had a lot of roughage in them, my intestine would flop over and cause an intermittent obstruction. And that's what was causing my pain and a lot of the GI symptoms that I had had. So they fixed that and took out my appendix, which had all kinds of adhesions and things on it. And then I remembered my mom telling me that as a child, they had determined that she had what they called chronic appendicitis. So I often wondered if it was the same sort of related thing. But my hospital bills were a little bit, not terrible, but probably a couple thousand. So I decided there was a group of women from church who were working at McDonald's as closers. So Nola Budge and Debbie Chappelli and I, we all worked at McDonald's for about 6 months as closers because you got 50 cents more an hour as closers. And we were the best employees that McDonald's had ever had. And we knew how to do it all. Nola worked the grill. Debbie and I worked the windows and the front register. So we would close down McDonald's most nights. And I made money to pay off my medical bills. And Debbie Chappelli was going to nursing school or doing her prerequisites for nursing school. And I thought, I kind of always wanted to be a nurse, but I didn't think I was smart enough. So maybe I'll look into it. Well, I had my degree from the University of Maryland. It was 10 years old at that point. But I contacted Towson State University, where she was going to be going, and they had what was called a second degree program. And if you already had a college degree, they would take that for everything except for the classes you needed for the major and any prerequisites specific to that. So I applied, and I was accepted, and I even applied for an extension because some of my science classes were over 10 years old, and that was their limit. And I got the extension, and I started going to school. Debbie Chappelli and I commuted. It was almost an hour from our homes. She had 7 children from a his and her marriage that were all in elementary school, and I had 4 children, and Amber was about 2 at the time. We trooped over there. We took our prerequisites that we needed to, and then we both applied to the nursing program and got in. And we started with Nursing 101, Dr. Damertowski, the only B I got out of my entire return to college. Everything else I got A's in. So Dr. Damertowski, it was an interesting theory class, and I remember them talking about how nursing had changed over history. The girls we were going to school with were all in their 20s, and I was in my mid-30s. She was in her early 30s, I believe. They're all looking at us, and every time they talked about like a war, World War II or something, they'd look at us and we'd be like, we're not that old, we weren't there and all. But it was an interesting experience to be with these 18 and 20-year-olds and their perception versus yours. I remember one time they were talking about dignity in the hospital and how, what kind of things do people like to do by themselves? And it came up that, you'd like to go in and go to the bathroom by yourself. Well, Debbie and I both started laughing because we had young children, and the chances of you being able to go in the bathroom and not have one of them slip you a note under the door or interrupt you, didn't happen very often. But those were great memories. But then her husband decided to move up near the Philadelphia area, and so she left. So I was left to finish. I had about a year and a half left of my degree by myself. And I had, like I said, about an hour commute. I don't know how many thousands of miles I put on my van, but I would record my studying session. So I'd go to the class, take all kinds of notes, then I'd get home and I'd record the high points, and then I'd listen to them in the car on the way back and forth, and that minimized the amount of studying I had to do at home. Although I did read my textbooks to my children as, bedtime stories, so they learned all kinds of things, especially the summer I took microbiology. But I can still remember talking about what a laceration was versus an abrasion, and you can ask my older kids and they'll know the difference. And this was around the time that we came up with the Lewis family definition of bleeding. In order to be considered bleeding, it needs to run down the extremity. It cannot just pool, like you skin your knee and it just pools. That's not bleeding. It has to run down the extremity. So my kids still laugh about that to this day. And of course, they all believe that, they did not receive the best health care growing up because mom would ignore all of their symptoms and things. In one case with Amy, she was in high school and she was running on the track team. And somehow she caused a stress fracture in her leg, but it would only bother her at night. So she'd come to me at night and say, my ankle really hurts. Well, the fracture was up, but it was referred pain. Well, she ran on that broken, quote unquote, broken leg for probably 2 months before we got them to x-ray it high enough that they could see that she had that stress fracture. And by that time, the fracture had started to heal, and when your bones heal, they make a circle around it. And the first person read it as a tumor and said that she had a tumor on her leg. But then they figured out that that was just because it had been there so long and it had healed so much. So that's what happens when you have a mother as a nurse. I graduated from nursing school in December of 1987 and went to work at Suburban Hospital as a graduate nurse after we took a Christmas trip down to Disney World. And I knew being in nursing that it would probably be hard to get holidays off for some time, so we took the opportunity between me being a nursing tech and being a new graduate nurse, which went by GN, to do that. Then I took my boards. I was supposed to take them in February, but someone stole one of the tests, so they put them off until April. And as fate would have it, national boards, which you took in person at that time, on one date, they took it the same date all over the United States, happened to be over spring break for my school-aged children, and John had an important business meeting. So he was actually out of town. I got mom to watch the kids. It was 2 days long, and you went to 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon for 2 days. So I was a nervous wreck because here I was, dropping kids off at my mom's to go take my state boards in Annapolis, come back and pick them up and then do the same thing the next day. And I was just sure I wasn't going to pass, but I did pass and I became an RN, and I still remember saying, well, a GN is a good nurse. What's an RN? And I said, a really good nurse. It takes you through nursing school in 1987 graduation, and we will pick up with part 2, which covers the second half of my children being born, and it's really exciting. Thanks for listening.